Hi, and welcome to the episode of PDA Dad UK. In this episode, I'm going to be looking at the difference between tantrums and meltdowns, the subtle differences between what a tantrum is and what a meltdown is, and how we can deal with them differently, especially if we've got kids who are autistic and are experiencing meltdowns. So as I say, welcome back to PDA Dad UK. Please, before we go on any further, do go hit like, hit subscribe and ring the bell. That way you'll know when anytime I've got new content coming up. And it also helps put this out to the masses as far as YouTube are concerned. It just triggers their algorithms. It makes a big difference to me. So please do go ahead and do that. As I say, in this episode, we're going to be looking at the difference between tantrums and meltdowns. Now, as a parent to an autistic child, we experience both. For a neurotypical child, you're only likely to experience tantrums. And it can be very difficult to know the difference between. They present almost identically. However, there's a big difference in the motivation or the reasons behind a tantrum versus a meltdown. And that's what we're going to go into and examine the difference between the two and how we can deal with both. So what is a tantrum? So a tantrum is something a child goes through which has a purpose. It's a willful expression of a want or a desire that's being unmet as far as they're concerned. So I have a neurotypical son and I have a neurodivergent daughter, and both experience tantrums and both go through expressing tantrums. The difference is, as I say, what with a tantrum, what's happening is it's for a purpose. So my son, when he starts exhibiting behaviours, and he copies them from his sister, which is the interesting thing. I mean, there's a fair age gap between them. There are 5 years between them. But for my son, he's observed my daughter going through meltdowns, and he kind of sees that it could be a way to get what he wants in a specific situation. Now, it appears to be very manipulative, and probably at some level it is, but it's just kids being kids. This is what kids do. It's about pushing boundaries and working out where the boundaries lie. And with tantrums, they tend to get less severe as time goes on and to the point that they're eradicated. And you learn as a parent how to deal with tantrums with your kids in the different ways. My son will exhibit a tantrum when he's not getting something he wants, or he's having to do something he doesn't want to do. So an example is, tidy up after yourself. If I'm telling him to put his toys away in the living room and clear out the floor, he may exhibit a tantrum. He may get stroppy and fussy, and he may exhibit very similar behaviours to what I see with my daughter when she's in meltdown. And the difference between the tantrum and the meltdown is the tantrum, it's a deliberate expression to get what he wants. He has a goal in mind. And for us with that, the very simple thing to do is just to ignore it. Just say, don't be ridiculous, or go to the naughty step, you're misbehaving right now. And he has to go and do that. And with those, and there's also a reward side to it. You can say, if you stop that behavior and you come down and you do this, maybe you can have that. But you've got to show that you've earned it. Different ways that you can sort of go through. And they're just different styles of parenting and different ways of going about things. And it's just, as I say, different with a neurotypical child because he has the ability to reason. And that's a really clear difference. So with a meltdown is a physical expression of inner turmoil, anxiety that's just built to the point that they can't contain it any longer. And we've talked a lot about the glass, and we have this internal emotional glass that fills and empties as the day goes on. And for, people like myself, neurotypical people generally, it's contained. It's able to be, monitored. But when it hits the top, that's when it all overflows, and that's when we act in an irrational way. And we may do silly things, shout, scream, punch a wall, I don't know, whatever happens for you. Just that expression that it's got to too much of a point. And so we go back to what I've talked about before with the traffic light system. So basically for myself, I live in the green most of the time. My anxiety is at a level where I can manage it and it's all fine and everything's hunky-dory and I'm going on with my life. If I get particularly stressed, I may click into the amber. So I had an example of this morning. The guy parked in a really stupid place as everyone was trying to get through, and in the process hit the car behind him. And I was really angry. Like, you could see he was clearly not going to do anything. And I was like, you're kidding, aren't you? But I remained in control of my emotions. I remained in control of my rationality. and dealt with the situation as was appropriate. The difference is that when we click into the red, that's when things have just got to a point where we can't contain it any longer, and that's when we get explosive behaviours. And everyone clicks into the red at some point. When things are just so stressful or so difficult, we hit the red. For people like my daughter, she lives in the amber all the time. That amber light is always on. So it appears, because rationality is there, it appears that she's containing it, and she's just getting on, and she's, you know, you wouldn't know that she was autistic. You wouldn't see that in her. The difference comes in that it only takes something very small, a little bit, because her glass is basically always full, and it all spills over the edge, and that's when you get meltdowns. Now, the difference is a meltdown, it's not something that she can help. It's not something that she can control. It's not something that she's doing willingly. She doesn't have a goal at the end of it. She is simply melting down because it's the body trying to express and expel all this pent-up anxiety that's inside her, and that's what we get with a meltdown. Now, they present very similarly. So my son might pick up a toy and throw it when he's annoyed and he doesn't want to be cleaning up, and he might have a strop like that. My daughter will pick up a toy and throw it in a meltdown, but it's a very different motivation. She's not trying to, you know, get me to do something or get out of doing something. She just simply can't cope any longer, and that's her way of expressing it, is to just lash out, and there can be a real danger involved with it. As I say, the foundational difference comes down to the motivation behind it. Is it for a goal, or is it expressing something that's just built up too much? And for me, the key to deciphering between the two was all about looking for triggers. If my daughter, and this is an important point, with autistic kids or neurodivergent kids, they will still have tantrums. They're still kids. They're still going to behave as kids do. What we've had to learn is the difference between my daughter's in a tantrum and when she's actually in meltdown. And it's got easier as time has gone on. As she's got older, the tantrums have reduced. However, the meltdowns have remained. For my son, the tantrums, there's, you know, he's only 6. They're there and they present. The difference is they will reduce as time goes on. Unlike the meltdowns for my daughter, where they're going to be a continual thing, and there may be something that she has to learn to deal with for her whole life. My experience from talking to autistic people has been that you learn to deal with these things, but meltdowns still occur, and they can occur in different ways. So you might learn to not pick something up and throw it, but that need to express that pent-up anxiety still remains. So meltdowns still occur. So with my daughter, it's been learning the difference between when she's in a tantrum and when she's in a meltdown. And as I say, the key for us has been really observing triggers. You can see, and I've spoken about this before when I've talked about meltdowns, and please do go check out the links will be in the description for those videos. Well worth checking out, because they do help to identify, you know, when a meltdown's occurring, how you can deal with it at the time. The big key for that was learning to identify triggers. So learning patterns and things that I see in my daughter when she's heading into a meltdown. And they can start quite early on. It'll be fidgety, so she starts stimming, and she's quite subtle with her stimming until she cut her hair. She had quite long hair, and she'd twirl her hair and you could see it. Now she actually gets quite physically shaky, and you can see it's building, and you can see the anxieties there. So that's when I know I need to step in and make certain changes. It might be a change to the environment. It might be just calming things down somehow. And that's a really key thing for learning that that's when we're heading into a meltdown. Identifying the environment that we're in. If we're in a crowded place, if there's lots of noise, lights, Christmas, as I spoke about in my last episode, can be really difficult because there's so much sensory overload. So learning to reduce those overloads. And the key thing was remaining calm for myself. And I find this very challenging when you've got someone who's wanting to hit you and swear at you and carry on. It can be very hard to maintain that calm centering. But it's something I've had to learn to do. I still fail all the time. I'm not claiming I'm any kind of super parent here or anything like that. I'm human, unfortunately, and you know, I fail at this. But what I can say is by learning to try and remain calm, it does make things a lot better. If I'm overreacting in a meltdown, it just creates a vicious cycle. Her anxiety peaks because I'm angry, and then that leads to further or more severe meltdowns, or lengthening the time of the meltdown that's already there, or going into a meltdown when she hasn't quite reached that yet. It's very, very difficult, but it's something that's really important to learn to do. What I have learned is that my daughter gets certain facial expressions that she can't help. They're like poker tells, if you like. If she's in a tantrum, if she's going into something which is more goal-based, so that's, as I say, going back, that's the difference. So tantrum is wanting to achieve a goal. If my daughter wants a packet of sweets and I'm saying, no, I'm sorry, we can't do that at the moment. We've already had some sugar today, we're not having any more. That's when you can start to see the tantrum building. And you can see her mind processing it, and that's the big difference. Logic's still in there. So I've spoken before about the Star Trek analogy with Spock, Kirk, and the lizard. And the idea is basically that at the front of our brain we have Spock, who is the pure logic side of things. We have the middle of the brain, which is Kirk, so it's the emotional and that kind of response, and that's the emotional processing center. In the back we have the lizard, which is our flight, fight, freeze, fawn, all that stuff. Our human basic instincts, basically, our survival instincts. What happens in a meltdown is that Spock goes for a walk, and so logic has left the building. There is no more ability to process logically, and that's why when you see a child in a meltdown, trying to reason at that point is just going to be useless, and in fact can harm the situation. Whereas with my son, so if my son's in a tantrum or about to have a tantrum, having a tantrum, I can reason with him. Logic is still there, and I can reason with him in that situation. Now, Kurt, think about what you're doing right now. Is that really something you want to be doing? What do you think is going to happen if you do that? And I can bring in that reasoning, and he can process it. So, do you want to go to the naughty step, or are you going to stop what you're doing and tidy your toys away like you've been asked to? And he will generally respond to that. He may still go into a tantrum, and that's part of the boundary pushing that exists in all kids. But that's him learning his place in the world and where his limits are set and what he can maybe get away with and maybe what he can't get away with. He is in control at that point, and we can step in and keep Spock in the picture, if you like. So when my daughter's in meltdown, however, Spock's gone, and so reasoning has gone, and no amount of reasoning once she's hit meltdown. One of the tricks we've had to learn over time is try and engage reasoning early on. If we can see my daughter, if those triggers are noticeable, if we know we're in an area, it's like, you tell me if you're getting a bit stressed and we can go and do something else for a while, or we'll get out of here, okay? And she knows she has the ability to do that, puts her in control, which really helps with the PDA side of things. We can apply those things to it, and that helps to maybe avoid getting into the meltdown. Once we're in a meltdown, there's no getting out of it. And that's a really key thing to learn. Meltdowns, once they've hit, they're there, and you've got to ride the meltdown as best you can. And that's where my remaining calm, that's where just doing the right things in certain situations. I had to keep an eye out for danger, because a big problem with meltdowns is that often kids will be harmful to themselves or to others unintentionally. But that's my responsibility to monitor that and ensure that everybody is safe, and take whatever measures are needed to ensure the safety of everybody. So with a tantrum, if my son's in a tantrum, I can use that reasoning, and I can say, right, well, you're going to have to go and sit on the naughty step if you carry this on, aren't you? And you can apply a reward or consequence to a situation, and he can process it and respond accordingly. As I say, they both present very similarly, and it's learning the difference. And what I was saying before was that I've learned to tell from my daughter when it's likely that we're heading into a tantrum, and I know the differences when we're heading into a meltdown, and I can see the triggers that are involved. And there's many ways you can go about this, taking notes just in your own mind. And I used to use my phone. Once if we'd had a meltdown, I used to keep a little sort of time, date, and look for triggers. What was happening at the time? How long did it last? Things like that. It just helped me to establish a pattern and see the difference, the environmental factors, and the just what was going on at the time that led my daughter into a situation where she went into meltdown. By learning that, we've learned to minimize them over time, and it's a real learning process, and it's going to be different for every family. Every child is different. Every autistic child is different. Every autistic person is different. Every person is different, and you are going to have different needs and different things that you're going to have to identify. Some people might be fine in crowds and with noises, but it could be something as simple as the clothes they're wearing. There's so many different things that can lead to these, meltdowns, but there are commonalities within it as well. Dealing with tantrums is something that we as parents learn to do over time, especially, once you've had one child. But this was an interesting thing, and this is something that happens, I think, for families that maybe have a neurodivergent child and then a neurotypical child, is we had to relearn our parenting again. When we had my daughter and we went into sort of what we knew as parents, as far as, what we learned from our parents, and you take the lessons that you've learned in seeing other people. And we had to, once we'd realized that there was something more going on than my daughter was autistic, we had to relearn our parenting style, and we had to do it quite dramatically. When you bring PDA into any mix, you have to really relearn how to parent, because you've got to learn to rephrase things and offer a sense of control that you don't necessarily have to do with a neurotypical child. I was very lucky that one of my good friends is a teacher in primary school, and she'd come to visit, and she actually noticed and said, you've got to understand, he's not your daughter, and what you need to be able to do is relearn. You're going to have to relearn your parenting a bit, because he can reason. And once I learned that, I realized I had to parent my son differently to my daughter. And because, as I say, when my daughter's in meltdown, and when anybody's in a meltdown, reason has gone, Spock has left the building, and there is no control. There is no reasoning. There is no rationale that you can apply. You have to ride it and make them feel as calm and comfortable as possible, so that hopefully it reduces the severity and it reduces the time frame of a meltdown. With my son, I can reason, and that's probably the litmus test for knowing between a meltdown and a tantrum. If generally a tantrum will start with a want for something, so as simple as, I want a treat. I'm sorry, you're not having a treat now for whatever reason. I want the treat, stamping the foot, getting the typical sort of tantrum things that you see. But it's very much, I want something, and there's a goal to it. Now, with PDA, this becomes even more complicated again, because often a meltdown is resulted from a tantrum. And we've experienced this. So there starts with that goal-oriented. So, I've spoken a lot about what pathological demand avoidance is. I've talked about that a lot. And it's that need for control. And so if you're taking control away, can I have a treat? No. It creates a demand within them. I want the treat. I'm being blocked from that. There is a demand in place that it's a negative demand, if you like. I can't have that. Another example might be, I want to do something. If she wants to do something where I might think it's dangerous or something like that, she might want to climb a tree, and it's like, I'm sorry, no, none of that, we're not doing that. There's too much risk. It's not safe underneath it, whatever the case may be. Saying no to this, but I want to do that, and it's being blocked. So what happens is you get the tantrum. It starts goal-oriented. My daughter will start a tantrum because I want this, but because of the nature of PDA, because of the way that PDA operates and that need for control, it triggers the anxiety as well. So what happens is that the tantrum itself leads into a meltdown and the explosive behaviors that are associated with that. It's really difficult, and trying to navigate the tantrum to avoid the meltdown is even more complicated again, and it's something that we've had to learn over time to do. And often it's the promise of something, what's to follow kind of thing. Look, if you can behave, maybe you'll be able to do that, or diverting. And I've talked a lot about the PDA tactics, and you can check those videos out as well. But diverting to something different. Well, why don't we try this for now? Just giving something else to do, a different option, allowing that sense of control back in, that she's able to make the decision about what she's going to do. A couple of different options, rather than climbing the tree or having the treat. That's the way we can often step through the tantrum and avoid getting to the meltdown. It is really, really complicated, and it's something that every parent will have to learn to do differently, especially for any parent who has autistic kids. It just makes it's so much more complicated than it is for raising a neurotypical child. And I see it between my son and my daughter all the time, and the simplicities that can be there with my son and the complexities that can be there with my daughter. And it goes the other way as well. Another way I've learned to deal with the tantrum side of things is being able to ignore it. The way I look at it is, it's kind of a tantrum, if you like, needs to have somebody there to witness it. It needs an audience. It needs somebody to be able to play to. So by ignoring a tantrum, you can often avoid, the situation, and it says simply, this isn't working, so they move on. That logic process still taking place, as we talked about. When it's a meltdown, you can't ignore it, and it will actually make things worse. It's almost, it's a difficult thing to sort of analyze in that way. But basically, if my daughter's in a meltdown, she needs to know I'm there and I'm her safety for that situation. If she doesn't have that, it can make the meltdown worse. So something you can ignore, and it will carry on whether you ignore it or not. Whereas a tantrum often will stop if you are just simply taking that witness audience aspect away from it. They just see it's not working and move on. So that's an important difference between the two. And it's again, it's so hard to know, and it's something that you start to learn with the differences and the idiosyncrasies that are in your kids, and the way that you will approach situations and the way they respond to certain situations. Really, it just comes back down to observing those triggers, observing the situation and understanding, and you start to learn the difference. As I said before, my daughter gets an expression on her face and you can see her mind working. And I know when it's a tantrum, I know when it's a meltdown now. And in fact, we can sometimes have a meltdown that's almost deliberate in itself. As I said before, the problem is that the tantrum can lead into a proper meltdown because of that unmet need, that unexpressed anxiety. And so, it's just a big part of PDA that we've had to learn to sort of deal with and navigate our way around. There are no easy solutions for this, and I'm not peddling that at all. It's simply a case of understanding the motivations, and just understanding that motivation can be a big difference in understanding whether you're experiencing a tantrum or a meltdown. If you can see this is entirely about achieving a goal, it's likely you're in a tantrum. If it is a build-up over, for my daughter, a meltdown can come in seconds flat, but knowing the environments we're in, I can be prepared for it. Knowing the things that create anxiety for her, I'm able to then do something that can, minimize the situation or minimize the danger in the situation for her. We have to live life in the meantime. I don't want to put her in situations where she's struggling, but, we have to go shopping. That's just a reality. We have to do certain things, and we have 4 people in our family, and they all have their own individual needs as well. And it's not fair to keep my son cooped up because my daughter can't handle a certain situation. So it's being able to find situations where I can help my daughter and support her, while also allowing my son to have his needs met. And it's a constant game of chess that we play, I think, as parents in general, but especially when we bring in autism to the mix and how that all comes together. It's a challenge, it's difficult, but we do it. And the result is that we get our amazing kids and we meet them where they're at, and we're supporting them and doing what they need. That's pretty much what I had to say. Thank you so much for joining me. I would love to hear your comments on this, so please do leave a comment. I'd love to know what tactics you found, what ways that you've been able to identify the difference between tantrums and meltdowns. Please also do go hit like, hit subscribe, ring the bell so that you know when new content's coming up. As I say, it makes a huge difference to how these videos get out there. I will see you again on the next episode, but in the meantime, do stay safe.